Welcome. We're going to go ahead and do part 2 of chapter 3, talking about construction types. So, look in your IBC, and I would go ahead and look at chapter 6, which is types of construction, so that you'll have that ready for us to review. Okay, one of the things I want to make sure that you understand is that if you're looking back at the PowerPoint, structural frame considerations. Columns, girders, beams, trusses, spandrels. This is kind of all the things that structurally have direct connections to the columns and bracings that carry, of course, the gravity loads of a building. So that's kind of what we're talking about. These are the structures that kind of typically tell us what types of construction we have. There are secondary members that also come into consideration. Those are including bracings members designed to carry only lateral loads, because sometimes we may have wind or seismic earthquakes or any type of items that could make a building sway. They're also required fire resistance, and the same is required as the building elements, which are located like walls, floors, and roofs. Okay, so we go back and we look at this particular table. We're going to talk about different types of construction. And if you look in your IBC code book on page 107, you're going to see types of construction. We have structural frame elements, bearing walls, non-bearing walls, and partitions, floor construction, and roof construction. Usually is non-combustible materials. And a lot of times you see wood is rarely used. If used, it's highly fire retardant, especially in high-rise buildings. So you're going to notice that we're talking about types 1 and 2 right here, and I'm talking about type 1 construction at this point. So let's go and let's look at this particular table, because that kind of puts things in perspective with the visual that you see in the PowerPoint. Okay, if you look in through here, you're going to end up seeing, of course, that we have bearing walls, exterior, and you see what is A and B. A is non-protected and B is protected. These are structural elements that are protected. Remember, we talked about columns and girders, things that are supporting the weight of the building. So we're talking about bearing walls. You see exterior here. If it's non-protected, it has to have a 3-hour rating. So here you see in the diagram that's in the PowerPoint, here's an exterior wall. It has to be 3 hours. If it is protected, some type of coating, could be a steel building with concrete around it, it could only be 2 hours rating. If you look at non-bearing walls and partitions on the exterior, it says see table 602. We'll have to turn, and we'll do that in a minute. But I want to go ahead and go down to non-bearing walls and partitions, interiors. So that means in between these two rooms, like on the second floor, okay, you see the partition. It doesn't have to have ratings. So type 1, A or B, has a 0. These numbers indicate the hourly rating that you see here. If we do floor construction associated with second members, okay, here's a floor construction. How do we do it? It has to have 2 hours, both of them. And normally that means it may be steel trusses and it has a concrete poured slab on top of it. So that would get a rating. Those are assemblies. How do you put all of these different materials together? And that's an assembly that you see here. And then it talks about roof construction. You can see here the roof has to have 1.5 hours, okay, if it's non-protected, and 1 hour if it's protected. But always notice these little letters down beside are back behind him. If I can get a little closer, you can see that. You have a B or BC. B means except in group F1, H, M, and S1 occupancy. Fire protection of structural members shall not be required, including protection of roof framing and decking, where every part of the roof construction is 20 feet or more above any floor immediately below. So if we're at 20 feet or more, the fire retardant treated wood members shall be allowed to be used as unprotected members. So that means if we had a ceiling height of 20 feet, then it wouldn't have to be as protected. Okay? So C, in all occupancies, heavy timber should be allowed where a 1 hour or less fire resistant rating is required. If it's less than 1 hour. So if here, if it was less than 1, then you could use, and we had 20-foot ceilings, you could use, of course, the heavy timbers. Okay, if you're looking at 1B, this, of course, is showing you how that works. Okay, bearing walls exterior is 2. Okay, so you see the 2 hours right there. And then you see, of course, looking back here, non-bearing walls, as you go back to the section, non-bearing walls and partitions interior, 0, which you see, of course, here. And then floor construction associated, the floor construction is still 2. And then roof construction would be 1. Okay, so you're kind of understanding how this all works when we put things into play. So non-combustible usually is concrete, masonry, or steel. And non-combustible is allowed by code, okay, but it's usually in partitions, separating areas within areas on type 1 and 2. Okay, type 2 construction, structurally framed elements, bearing walls, non-bearing walls, and partitions, floors, construction, and roof construction is to be non-combustible materials, which is the same, which we just reviewed, as type 1. Okay? Type 2A, looking at it here back in your code book, it's a primary structural 1 hour, bearing walls 1, okay, bearing 1, interior bearing, because like if you had a column here on the first floor, that would be 1 hour, okay. Non-bearing walls and partitions inside, same thing, non-rating, because what you're doing, you're creating this envelope here, interior envelope, to contain the fire. Same thing here, okay. So you can look and see how those are rated. Type 2B, same thing. Look at it here. Double check. It's non-rated exterior. Partition's non-rated. Roof is non-rated. The structural elements, of course, here, non-rated. Everything is non-rated, type 2B construction. Type 3, exterior walls to be of non-combustible materials. Fire retardant treated wood framing permitted within assembly of 2 hour rating or less. And the interior building elements of any materials permitted by code. Structural elements wholly or partially constructed with wood. A lot of times you see small office buildings with wood or metal stud interior partitions. And a lot of time urban buildings where fire can spread from building to building. So let's look at type 3. So if you look at type 3A, you see the exterior, of course, is 2 hours. Interior, of course, structural is 1. Non-bearing is 0. Floor construction is 1. And then your roof is 1. Now, remember, go back to the BC. If we have this 20-foot ceilings, then the roof wouldn't have to be rated. because what they're thinking is most fires start from the ground, and then it would have to re-raise, have a big fire to be able to get to your ceiling or to your roof, second floor. 3B, I think you understand that. So if you go back and look at 3B, the rating of those, 2 hours on the exterior, but everything else is a 0 rating. So now we talk about combustible heavy timbers. Remember we said heavy timbers are like 8x8, 6x6, big pieces of wood that goes through that, and that's type 4. And it's almost heavy timber where you see, of course, being used structurally and through here. But you've got to kind of go back and look at other items within the code book to kind of understand and make sure that it would work. Type 4 construction, of course, heavy timbers, in which the exterior materials and interior building elements are of solid or laminated woods without concealed spaces. That means you don't have soffits, plenums, or suspended ceiling coming down. Details of type 4 construction have to comply with the provisions of chapter 6. So you'd have to go back and read cover to cover what you could use. Fire retardant treated wood framing has to comply with section 2303.2 in here within the exterior wall assemblies that require 2-hour rating. So you have to review 602.4. This is talk about 602.4, and it tells you have to go back and look at these other areas to make sure that you stay and you comply. So this is what heavy timber, what we're talking about here. You see large blocks that are being used structurally to hold and support. And then this is your hourly rating, of course, with heavy timbers. Type 5 construction is a lot of times what we consider stick buildings. This type of construction in which the structural elements, exterior walls, and interior walls are wood framed. Most combustible construction type. Very combustible. It's just a house, a stick building. It's made with 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s to be able to use it. Wood frame exterior and interior walls are sometimes brick. I mean, we may have a stick building, a 2x4 wall, but we may have brick on the outside or siding or stucco. Typically it's small in size in residential housing, sometimes dentist offices, sometimes small commercials are out of stick or wood framing. So if we go back and look in here in the code book, you can see primary structural 1 hour, exterior walls 1, interior 1. Okay, this is bearing walls, load bearing walls. Okay, non-bearing walls 0, floor construction 1 hour, and then roof 1. Back to the BC. If we're 20 foot or tall, then it wouldn't have to be rated. Okay, and then you'll notice type 5B, where it's all protected, it doesn't have to have any rating. Now, just so that you understand, if you go back and you look at section 708 in here, it talks about fire partition. It's a different type of fire-resistant component on its own particular requirement. It is limited to the scope following requirements. Now, when you get into residential, you get into different items, section 420 on page 91 in the IBC book, you're going to see that residential goes through and does a lot more separations. Corridor walls. If you go back and look at corridors, let's look at table 1018.1, which is page 264 in your code table. So I'm just kind of briefly telling you a few things, but we're going to be adding to this. If you look in A corridor is a hallway. We might have a hotel and we may have rooms on either side, and we're walking down this corridor or a hall, we might say, here in East Texas. So it's telling you that if you have an occupant load out of any of these particular occupancies, assembly, business, educational, remember right here, factory, mercantile, all of these that you see, if there's greater than 30 without a sprinkler system, you have to have one. If you have a sprinkler system, it's none. So every hallway, we want you protected. So if a fire starts down the room and you have to go out down the hall to get out, it's giving you a little time to do that. So that's why you see, and you'll notice that this particular table talks about the occupancy, talks about your occupant load, okay? And then it tells fire resistant rating without sprinkler system and with sprinkler system. So a lot of times a hazard, it's not permitted. It's going to tell you you have to have a sprinkler system. And it's still some of them giving you ratings. A residence, okay, here we are in the hotel. Even though we have a sprinkler with a sprinkler system, you still have to have 30 minutes, 0.5, a half an hour to be able to get out, because people are going to sleep soundly in their hotel rooms, and you want to make sure that even though you might wake up, it may take you a little while, you still have time to find that stairway to get out of the building. So the minimum fire resistant rating shall be 1 hour, except when you kind of look through, we were talking about corridors, dwelling units. So kind of make sure you understand what is your building type, and then you've got to go and look at your corridor fire rating, okay, so that therefore you know it may end up changing, because that's something that you're going to have to work within. Ratings represent the length of time a material or a combination of materials must resist fire. In older buildings, it's kind of very difficult to determine that, because without a clear information to know how that wall is classified. So a lot of times you have to go back and either tear out the wall, or you're going to have to apply something to make it have that rating if you're going back and doing retrofitting that building. Limited combustible materials are defined as materials that do not meet the requirements of non-combustible materials because they do not have some capacity to burn. Okay, well, I hope this kind of helps you so that you can kind of go back through, review, and read your chapter, and then we'll go on to the next recording, part 3, after this.